Hello everyone, my name is Susan Morales. If this is your first time on my channel, please subscribe. I make videos where we talk about what it means to follow Jesus and how that looks in our daily life. Lately, I've been exploring the topic of human sexuality. It's sort of a very important topic when it comes to following Jesus. Our life, when it comes to our sexuality, is going to be dictated by what we are taught in the Bible. And I have been making videos on this topic. My last video was about modesty, and I asked people to comment on that video if they would like for me to make a follow-up on the topic. And there was another video as well where I was talking about purity culture, and there was a comment in that video that I would also like to explore today, having to do with sexuality and marriage, and if that is the whole point for why we get married. So that's what I want to talk about today in this video. Let's begin. The first comment I want to highlight today is from Nathaniel Jordan, and I always appreciate reading his comments. So he says, "Great video as always. I would like if you could address how a man should dress as well. Also, sexuality is a natural thing, so a woman could be covered from head to toe and still be attractive. I think your advice to men fits for married men because they have a beautiful wife. If males and females didn't sexualize the other, I'm not sure how marriages could be started." I knew from the beginning that I shared that video, I knew that there was a lot that needed to be said, and so now it's a good opportunity to be more detailed about what I meant in that video. In my last video, I made a distinction from being legalistic, from actually teaching to think critically to women in particular about how they dress and why they should dress modestly. And I think that it really does come down to the heart. Your heart should be in the right place. You should have a heart that obeys what God teaches you means to be a woman, and to go against what the world is teaching us about what being a woman should be. And that is an overly sexualized, dehumanized thing or object. And that goes with the topic of purity culture, about not thinking that marriage or a wife is supposed to just serve as your own type of sexual gratification object. But before we go down to that comment, let me address the first part of this comment. In my other video, I made it a point not to tell women, don't wear this, wear this. I think that every woman has the ability to make those decisions, and they can, of course, ask God to guide them as they make those decisions for their own bodies that are appropriate in the culture that they live in, while at the same time not going along with the world's trends and what is being normalized by the world. So it's going to be very interesting for you to hear my own perspective, because maybe other women will disagree with me. The way that I grew up is really different than how someone else grew up. So it's one of those things that each of us has to take before the Lord and really think through it. Was the way I was raised, are the things that are normal to me actually proper according to the Bible? What could be the implications of accepting this as normal, as good, and so forth? So for example, in my home, we were 3 daughters when I was growing up, and my dad, he was the only guy in the house. If it was ever a hot day and my dad wasn't wearing a shirt, the girls would always be like, "Dad, put a shirt on." And so my dad typically would just wear one of those just undershirts, right? So my kids are going to also grow up with my values. That was my upbringing, and it was just one of those things where we respect each other's privacy. Nobody's walking around the house without clothes and things like that, which I've heard is normal for other families. The way that I raise my kids is going to resemble that. So we respect each other's privacy. So the dad also in this house he's always clothed, mom as well. We're private when we get dressed and things like that. We want to teach our kids to also respect their privacy because it's important for them to know that there's a boundary there, especially if they're out by themselves at school, at church, wherever. And it's important for them to know that their body is private and it's not something that someone else needs to be seeing or doing anything. That's a boundary. For that reason, I think it's a good idea for men to be modest when it comes to like not wearing anything around the house. But again, I understand, like if someone wants to cut the grass outside or we're at a pool, all of those things are things you and your family has to figure out. Now, for example, there was one situation where my husband, we were just dating at that time, and we went over to someone's house and the person didn't know that we were there. And we were actually waiting for someone else, but the person that lived there too came into the room not wearing a shirt, and it was awkward for me as the lady, and it was actually awkward for my boyfriend as well, right? Because we're having this conversation and the guy was not wearing a shirt. And so my boyfriend at the time, my husband, he actually asked him to wear a shirt. So it's really interesting because even guys can be protective of their girlfriends and feel like that's inappropriate. And the guy was gracious and he did. On my social media, there are some homeschooling moms that I follow, or just even like people from church and things like that. And for them, it's like really normal to just kind of show off their spouse. And so, for example, some wives will like record their husband without their shirt and they're like really muscular. That's when I have to figure out, what am I going to do? It's not normal. Like I said, for me, that's a boundary that has always been in my life, that undershirt boundary, right? So I have a decision. I can just look at the husband or whoever. I can look at their body, and women will be attracted to like muscular physique, and that is a temptation, I think, for some women. Other women, I guess, I don't know if it's just kind of normal for them. I wouldn't be able to speak for them. For me, out of respect for my husband, and I think he would appreciate it if I did this, I don't look. I just scroll away because I don't have to know what another man looks like under his shirt. And if I find myself feeling attraction feelings, then I'm opening the door to further thinking about that person later on, or even just thinking about them as the person that has a really nice body. Whereas instead, I would like to just think of guys as her husband or the church leader or, you know, my friend. So another thing would be, I came across a photo online when there was this whole scandal going on with one of the famous like celebrity pastors, that it was all over the news that he was unfaithful to his wife. And so one of the pictures that was just floating around was of him at the beach. They were all, even guys, were talking about how inappropriate this pastor was dressed at the beach. So for example, guys wearing super tight shorts or super low shorts, well, that's just drawing women's attention, even guys notice, right, to what should be private, and nobody needs to be noticing certain places of the opposite sex's body. I was actually having a conversation with my spouse about this, and I was telling him that I think for women and for men, there are just certain mental blurred boxes that you should just get used to, like just kind of boundaries where you don't look. Why? Because the next part of the comment, it's the way God created us. He made us with these attractions. We're attracted to the opposite sex, and like Nathaniel mentioned, that's how, you know, we do end up getting married, because we do have these desires. And this leads me to this other comment by someone else. I guess I'll be explaining, my answer for all of these comments all like at the same time, but I do want to go to the comment where someone brought up Bible verses. So it's Cage Stage Calvinist that said, she pointed out 1 Corinthians 7:2 and verse 9, because of immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband. And then, but if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. I think the point I was making is that marriage, being a wife, it's not about quenching the fire of your husband. And it's really interesting because I think even Jesus made the point that God has given some the natural ability to like not even have sexuality be a part of their lifestyle by birth, or some were made that way. I think Paul also said in the context of the Bible verses that I just read, it says that not everyone has the gift like Paul apparently had, where he can be single and he could give God all of his time. He didn't have to like worry about taking care of a wife, about taking care of kids. He could just devote all of his life and all of his attention to serving God. And he says that he wishes other people would be like him. I think that it's wrong for us to think that God created marriage for that reason, because when we consider other things in the Bible, we see that God didn't create everyone with those desires, and not everyone has to get married. Apparently not everyone is gifted for that. So I think those Bible verses are more saying that sex needs to be within the confines of marriage. The point is, do not be engaging in sexual activity, sexual immorality anywhere else. If you want to engage in that, the proper place is marriage. If you feel that desire, then you need to pursue married life and not just not pursue a marriage life and be falling for every single opportunity out there for you. But that's not the same thing as saying that you get married in order to be the thing that it's almost like the immorality vessel, right? Like people have this immorality that they need to just engage in doing that. I think that the Bible actually teaches that it's not immoral to have those desires. It's actually something that we are gifted, we are able to enjoy in this life here on earth with our spouse in the proper context. And it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And there's a lot of respect in it, a lot of working together as partners. There's a lot of uniqueness to it. It doesn't look like the world describes sexuality, where it's so casual and normal just to engage in that sort of thing with just anybody. Human sexuality is moral in the way that the Bible defines it. So the distinction that I want to make is that, yes, we have attraction, and that's good because there's a reason for us getting married. It's good to have children. God created the man and the woman for community, not to live alone, but rather to live as a community. And even our families, it is a blessing in our life to have our children, to have our extended family. We get to have community in this life when we're not feeling well, when we need help. We have people that we can depend on. Hopefully. I know there are some families out there that it's not a happy situation, but I think that is the original design, that it's good for us to have a community and for us to be able to do that in a moral, respectful way, especially for women. It's to have married life. In my videos, when I'm talking about modesty, I am not making light of the fact that we have very real feelings in our mind, in our heart, in our bodies. And definitely that's a huge factor for a lot of people when they decide who they want to marry. Usually you marry someone that you feel this attraction to. You have these desires, especially as time goes on. The love and the desires grow because that is the purpose that God has for us, to grow in our love and to grow in our desires for one another, but in the proper context and protection of marriage. But be very careful not to get these two things mixed up. There's attraction, but then do not confuse it with sexual immorality, because Jesus acknowledges that men, for example, have very strong desires and do engage in lusting after other women, another man's wife, for example. He talks about this. He acknowledges that these desires are out there and that people do this, but he says, don't. So he drew the line there. He said, this is inappropriate, this is immoral, this is adultery in the heart. So it's not enough for us, even as single people, married and single, as followers of Jesus especially, it's not enough for us to walk through life just being so mindful that, wow, I find so many people attractive. You know, God teaches us we are not mindless, that we have self-control, and He expects us to use it, to have self-control in our heart, in our mind, with our eyes, with our hands. He says if your eyes are, he says something like, if your eyes cause you to sin, then pluck them out. So he says, do something, obviously not literal. He says, do something to avoid sinning. And that's what I'm talking about, like creating these things that are helpful to you, like scroll away, don't lust, right? I feel like noticing someone's attractive is different than lingering in that noticing that they're attractive. And also, this really hits home to me because I think it's not right, and I feel that so many men don't get this, and they should. It's not right for women to feel that guys are constantly checking them out. It's very uncomfortable. Women should feel able to just walk outside of their home and just go from point A to point B without like feeling those stares, because women can tell. Women notice when your eyes are lingering. And for example, when men have a daughter, especially, men become very protective of their daughters. Men warn daughters about what's on guys' minds. And why is that? Because you know that you think your daughter deserves better than that. It's really great that men, hopefully for the most part, realize the value of their daughter, the value of a woman. But especially when you stop thinking about women like, oh, I'm so tempted by them, and you start thinking, my daughter, you know, and you start thinking, I don't want guys to be thinking about her when, you know, her body grows and she grows into this beautiful little lady. You know, all of a sudden you realize how twisted and sinful it is for a human being to just be constantly gawked at. It's not right. So in that way, that's what I mean, that although we are human beings and we notice when someone has a pretty body, when someone has a pretty face, we notice these things. I think it's okay to acknowledge, oh, that, you know, maybe you don't say it, right, obviously, but you acknowledge to yourself, yeah, that person is very nice looking, but you move past that and you think of that person as someone with substance. And okay, I'm talking to this person who is very nice looking, but they're my brother in Christ. Let me treat him like a brother in Christ. Let me conduct myself with respect. Let me not flirt with this person. Let me be serious with this person. Let me be kind with this person. Personally, on my channel, I like that the people that have joined me for interviews, for example, have not used the never be alone with a woman, including in a recorded Zoom session. I'm glad that that's not a situation for me, because that just like would put me in a situation where it's like, wow, like I'm not being treated in the same way that you would treat a man, you know? Like, trust me, nothing is going to happen here. There was one time when I was really young that there was a friend that I was just recently married, and there was this person that had come over, and we were waiting for my husband to come. And I realized that the person was not like coming to the living room to sit down on the couch. They would not move from the door. And it was really strange to me and really awkward, because I was trying to be polite. And I just saw myself as a person, not like this woman alone with a guy. And maybe now, sure, I will have that rule, right? But at the time, I'm just sharing this because I want you to notice that not every woman realizes that there's this thing happening, this inappropriate thing happening in like your mind. I don't know if I should say that or not, but there it is. The example that I gave to men, for example, to consider women as sisters, and like if you have a sister, you know you're not thinking constantly about her sexuality, you're not noticing her body. It might seem oversimplified, like, hey, that's just not realistic, we're going to notice other women out there. Or for women, you're going to notice other men out there. But I think what we can take from that example, and that we should all agree on as followers of Jesus, is that we can agree to not think of other people in sexual ways. I think it's possible to be attracted to someone while at the same time treating them with respect. And that includes the things that you think about that person in your own mind. The things that you choose to look at when that person is there in front of you. And most importantly, when we are single, we're not just supposed to look for the person that is the prettiest, the most handsome, because we know those things are going to fade away. And if that's what you want in a spouse, you're going to be very tempted when you're married, when your spouse doesn't look the way they did at the beginning. And if that's what you think marriage is, then you're going to be tempted to leave that marriage and pursue another one, because that's what marriage is, just fulfilling your desires. But instead, when we are single, we're supposed to be appreciating other things about people and really thinking through these things, seeing what their goals are, for example, in life, and if you guys share the same goals, exploring what your beliefs are on a lot of things, but also on God. You know, you're supposed to be nurturing a friendship, a relationship, and you know, the sexual aspect comes in marriage. So it's not something that you need to even obsess about when you're single. There's this really dumb idea in the world that some people say that you have to know what a person is like in that context, if you know what I mean, before you marry them. And that's just so wrong, because that's having the wrong idea again about what marriage is. In marriage, like I shared in, I think in that purity video, that area of your marriage is going to take some sacrifice as well. So it's not just going to be anything that I want goes. That's how my marriage has to look like. No, like being loving in your marriage is going to mean working together as partners and figuring out what that's going to look like in your marriage. So please remember that when we're just constantly thinking about other people from the opposite sex, and we're just obsessing about their sexuality, their sexual appeal, we're downplaying their humanity. We are people first before our sexuality. We always have to respect the opposite sex, especially women. Just think about all the places where there's a lot of corruption when it has to do with human sexuality. Look at the world, the terrible things that are being forced on women to do. And just imagine if we as Christians were an example to the world about how we think about people of the opposite sex and how we respect them and how people are not to be used. Imagine how safer women would be in the world if we thought of women as equal human beings and we stopped obsessing over their sexuality. They would be protected in their marriages. They would be protected in their single years. They would be treated as daughters, as sisters. So I want to challenge you, one man at a time. Work with God each day and ask Him to help you to live in such a way that you are interacting with the opposite sex in a way that is obedient to what He teaches us and that honors Him and sets a good example for other people that are looking at you to know how a Christian man's life is impacted by Jesus in that area of his life. Please remember to like this video and to subscribe if you haven't already. Leave me a comment and maybe I'll make a video in the future sharing my thoughts on your comment.